the 1st of November 1943. 2. 17 inches the morning. Darkness hangs over the Solomon Sea like a shroud, thick and absolute. The air is humid, clinging to skin, carrying the salt of the ocean and the faint metallic scent of distant rain. Aboard the Japanese heavy cruiser Sendai, lookouts strain their eyes against the blackness, searching for threats that might emerge from the void. The ship's engines hum a low, steady rhythm, a mechanical heartbeat pushing through water that reflects nothing, reveals nothing. Far above, stars pierce the tropical sky, indifferent witnesses to what is about to unfold. In the cramped radar room of the American light cruiser USS Montpelier, a young technician watches a circular screen glow faintly green in the darkness. His eyes are tired. He has been watching this screen for hours, seeing nothing but the ghostly sweep of the beam, around and around, painting emptiness. Then, at precisely 2:17, a small bright dot appears on the edge of the screen. Just one, then another, then three more. His hand freezes above the communication switch. For a moment, time compresses into that single phosphorescent glow. A radar ping, one radar ping, and in that instant, everything changes. The Solomon Islands campaign had been grinding forward for 15 months, a brutal island-hopping struggle through jungle, coral, and blood. Guadalcanal had fallen to American forces in February of 1943, but the Japanese had not accepted defeat. They had withdrawn, regrouped, and transformed Rabaul into a fortress, a sprawling base complex on New Britain Island that bristled with airfields, harbours, and over 100,000 troops. From Rabaul, Japanese aircraft and warships could threaten any Allied advance northward. It was a dagger pointed at the heart of the Pacific offensive, and American commanders knew it had to be neutralized. But Rabaul was too strong for a direct assault. The losses would be catastrophic. Instead, Admiral William Halsey devised a strategy of encirclement and isolation. American forces would bypass Rabaul, seizing Bougainville Island to the southeast, establishing airfields within bomber range. From there, they could pound Rabaul into submission without sacrificing thousands of lives in a frontal attack. On the 1st of November 1943, the 1st Marines hit the beaches at Empress Augusta Bay on Bougainville's western coast. The landings caught the Japanese off guard, but Tokyo could not allow this foothold to stand unchallenged. Within hours, Vice Admiral Sentaro Omori received his orders. Take a strike force south from Rabaul, destroy the American transports at Empress Augusta Bay, and annihilate the beachhead before it could be reinforced. It was a mission born of desperation and pride, a gamble that assumed the Americans would be vulnerable, scattered, unprepared. Omori assembled his force with speed. 2 heavy cruisers, Myoko and Haguro, each displacing over 13,000 tons and armed with 10 8-inch guns. 2 light cruisers, Sendai and Agano, faster and more nimble, designed for scouting and destroyer support. 6 destroyers completed the formation, sleek wolves of the sea trained in night combat. The Japanese Navy had built its doctrine around night engagements, mastering the art of surprise attacks under cover of darkness. Their crews were confident, seasoned. They had won at Savo Island, at Tassafaronga, at battles whose names were written in American blood. They expected to find transport ships, perhaps a few destroyers as escorts. They expected confusion, panic, easy targets silhouetted against the flames of burning landing craft. They expected another victory to add to the ledger, another demonstration that Japanese steel and spirit could turn back the American tide. What they did not expect was Rear Admiral Aaron Stanton Merrill. Merrill commanded Task Force 39, a screening force assigned to protect the Bougainville landings. He had 4 light cruisers under his direct command: Montpelier, Cleveland, Columbia, and Denver. Each ship mounted 12 6-inch guns in 4 triple turrets, capable of firing 15 rounds per minute per gun. Supporting them were 8 destroyers, divided into 2 divisions. Merrill was a chess player, a tactician who understood geometry and timing. More importantly, he understood technology. His ships were equipped with the new SG surface search radar, a revolutionary system that could detect enemy vessels at ranges exceeding 20 miles, even in total darkness. The Japanese had radar too, but theirs was primitive, unreliable, often ignored by commanders who trusted their eyes and their night-fighting traditions more than glowing screens. Merrill trusted his radar absolutely, and on that November night, that trust would mean the difference between life and death. At 2:17 inches the morning, when that first radar contact appeared on Montpelier's screen, Merrill was in the cruiser's Combat Information Center, a room filled with plotting tables, communication equipment, and the soft glow of radar displays. The report came through instantly. Contact bearing 315, range 21 miles, multiple targets. Merrill leaned over the plot, his face illuminated by the dim red lighting designed to preserve night vision. His voice was calm, steady. All ships, come to course 310, increase speed to 30 knots. The orders rippled through the fleet. Down in the engine rooms, boilers roared to life, turbines spinning faster, pushing tons of steel through dark water. Gun crews, dozing at their stations, snapped awake, securing helmets, checking ammunition. On the bridge of each ship, officers raised binoculars, searching the horizon, seeing nothing. But the radar saw everything. The Japanese strike force was approaching from the northwest, steaming directly toward Empress Augusta Bay, unaware that they had already been detected, that the ambush they planned to execute was being turned against them. The Japanese lookouts saw nothing. No ships, no wakes, no muzzle flashes. The ocean stretched empty in every direction, black and featureless. Aboard Sendai, Captain Masao Kamimura ordered his crew to maintain vigilance. But there was no alarm in his voice. They were still 30 miles from Empress Augusta Bay. If American ships were present, they would be clustered around the transports, defensive, predictable. The strike force would have the advantage of surprise, speed, and the long-lance torpedoes that had devastated so many American vessels in previous engagements. Each Japanese destroyer carried 16 oxygen-fueled torpedoes with ranges exceeding 20 miles, weapons far superior to anything the Americans possessed. The plan was simple. Race in at high speed, launch torpedoes at maximum range, close to gun range, and obliterate anything that remained afloat. It was a plan built on assumptions. Assumptions about American positions. Assumptions about American readiness. Assumptions about American technology. Every assumption was wrong. At 2:27, Merrill's force completed its turn, now on a course that would cross the Japanese formation's path at a 90-degree angle, a tactical maneuver known as crossing the T, allowing every gun on Merrill's cruisers to bear on the enemy while only the forward guns of the Japanese ships could return fire. But achieving this position required precise knowledge of the enemy's location, course, and speed. Without radar, it would be impossible in darkness. With radar, it was mathematical certainty. The range closed. 20 miles, 18 miles, 16 miles. The Japanese still saw nothing. At 15 miles, Merrill ordered his destroyers forward, 8 ships peeling away from the cruiser formation, racing ahead to launch torpedoes and create chaos in the enemy ranks. The Japanese radar operators, hunched over their primitive Type 21 sets, finally detected something, faint and uncertain. They reported contacts, but the ranges were erratic, the bearings unclear. Japanese commanders dismissed the reports, trusting instead the darkness and their own experience. It was a fatal mistake. At 2:45, the range had closed to 12 miles. Merrill could wait no longer. All cruisers, commence firing. The night exploded. 4 American cruisers opened fire simultaneously. 48 6-inch guns hurling shells into the darkness at targets they could not see, but knew with absolute precision. The radar-directed fire control systems calculated range, bearing, and target motion, feeding solutions directly to the gun turrets. The first salvos fell among the Japanese destroyers in the van of their formation, catching them completely by surprise. Columns of water erupted around the destroyer Samidare, then the destroyer Shiratsuyu. The crews barely had time to react before the second salvos arrived, and then the third. The 6-inch shells tore through thin destroyer armor like paper, detonating inside engine rooms, magazine spaces, crew compartments. Within 3 minutes, Samidare was on fire, dead in the water, listing heavily to port. Shiratsuyu took a direct hit to her forward magazine. The explosion was instantaneous, catastrophic. The ship broke in half, both sections sinking within 90 seconds. Over 300 men went into the water, thrashing in oil-slicked swells, screaming for help that would not come. Aboard Sendai, Captain Kamimura finally understood they were under attack, but he could not comprehend how. The Americans were firing from beyond visual range, hitting targets with uncanny accuracy, and the Japanese had not even located the enemy fleet. He ordered his ship to launch star shells, illumination rounds designed to light up the battlefield. The shells arced into the sky and burst, hanging beneath parachutes, casting a pale, flickering light over the ocean. But instead of revealing American ships, the star shells only silhouetted the Japanese vessels, making them perfect targets. American gunners adjusted their aim, and the next salvos were even more accurate. Sendai shuddered as a 6-inch shell punched through her bridge, killing Kamimura instantly. Another shell detonated in her forward turret, igniting ready ammunition. Fire spread rapidly, consuming the forward section of the ship. The crew fought desperately to contain the blaze, but the damage was too severe. Within 10 minutes, Sendai was burning out of control, slowing to a crawl, listing as water poured through ruptured hull plates. Admiral Omori, aboard the heavy cruiser Miyoko, realized the battle was already lost. His destroyers were being shredded by invisible guns. His light cruiser Sendai was dying. The American force had achieved complete surprise and was now maneuvering to trap his remaining ships. He had two choices: press the attack and risk losing his entire force, or withdraw and preserve what strength remained. Pride demanded attack. Survival demanded retreat. Omori chose survival. At 2:52, he ordered a general withdrawal, all ships to turn northwest and retire at maximum speed. But breaking contact was not simple. The American destroyers had closed to within torpedo range, and now they launched their own attack, dozens of torpedoes racing through the water at 46 knots. The Japanese destroyers, attempting to turn and follow Omori's retreat order, found themselves bracketed by converging torpedo tracks. The destroyer Hatsukaze took 2 torpedoes on her port side, the explosions breaking her keel. She sank in less than 4 minutes. The destroyer Naganami, maneuvering frantically, collided with the crippled Samidare, both ships grinding together in a shriek of tortured metal. They drifted, locked in a fatal embrace, still under fire from American cruisers. The Japanese torpedoes, launched earlier in wild desperation, streaked through the water toward empty ocean. The Americans had changed course twice since the Japanese had guessed their position, and none of the long-lance torpedoes found targets. They ran until their fuel expired, then sank harmlessly into the deep. The vaunted weapon that had terrorized the Pacific for 2 years was useless against an enemy they could not see. The American cruisers, meanwhile, continued their methodical destruction. Radar-directed guns tracked retreating Japanese ships, hammering them with salvo after salvo. The light cruiser Agano took 3 hits to her stern, wrecking her steering gear and reducing her speed to 15 knots. She limped away, trailing oil, her crew working frantically to repair the damage. The heavy cruisers, Miyoko and Haguro, larger and better armoured, absorbed several hits but remained functional, their own 8-inch guns finally returning fire. But their salvos were blind, aimed at muzzle flashes glimpsed briefly through smoke and darkness. Not a single American ship was hit. By 3:15, the Battle of Empress Augusta Bay was effectively over. The Japanese strike force, intended to annihilate the American beachhead, had been savaged without ever sighting the enemy fleet. 3 destroyers and 1 light cruiser sunk. 2 more destroyers crippled and abandoned. 1 light cruiser heavily damaged. Over 1,200 Japanese sailors dead, hundreds more wounded or struggling in the water, waiting for rescue that would take hours to arrive. American losses: 0 ships sunk, 0 ships damaged. 19 casualties, all from an accidental fire in Denver's galley, unrelated to combat. It was the most lopsided naval victory of the Pacific War to that point, achieved almost entirely through technological superiority and tactical brilliance. The radar ping at 2:17 had not just detected an enemy, it had erased a strike force. The survivors of the Japanese fleet straggled back to Rabaul over the following day, battered, demoralized, struggling to understand what had happened. In the officers' mess aboard Myoko, subdued conversations tried to make sense of the defeat. They had been the hunters, confident and experienced. They had become the hunted, blind and helpless. Some officers whispered about American radar, suggesting the technology was more advanced than intelligence reports had indicated. Others blamed Admiral Omori for not pressing the attack, for choosing retreat over Bushido, the warrior's code that demanded death before dishonor. But the truth was unavoidable. The Americans had fought a new kind of battle, one where seeing the enemy was irrelevant, where darkness offered no protection, where the old skills of night combat had been rendered obsolete by electronic eyes that pierced the void. The psychological impact on the Japanese Navy was profound. For 2 years, they had owned the night, exploiting superior training, superior torpedoes, and the Americans' initial technological disadvantage. Battles like Savo Island had become legends, proof that Japanese warriors could defeat numerically superior forces through skill and audacity. Now that confidence was shattered. If the Americans could detect them first, position themselves perfectly, and deliver devastating firepower before the Japanese even knew they were there, what chance did traditional tactics have? The answer was none, and every Japanese naval officer knew it. Doctrine manuals would have to be rewritten, tactics would have to be rethought. But the most painful realization was that technology had eclipsed training, that no amount of courage or skill could compensate for being blind in a battle where the enemy could see everything. American sailors experienced a very different revelation. In the wardrooms and mess decks of Task Force 39, the mood was jubilant. They had fought the Imperial Japanese Navy at night, the enemy's preferred domain, and won decisively. The victory validated every investment in radar technology, every hour spent training on the new equipment, every decision to trust the glowing screens over human eyes. Radar had seemed almost magical when it first appeared on American ships, a mysterious black box that somehow saw through darkness and weather. Now it was proven, battle-tested, a weapon as decisive as any gun or torpedo. Young radar technicians, once mocked as scope dopes by veteran gunners who trusted iron sights and experience, were suddenly heroes. The operator who had detected the Japanese at 2:17, a 22-year-old from Ohio named Michael Brennan, was awarded the Navy Cross for his alert watch and accurate reporting. He would later say that he had simply been doing his job, watching the screen as trained. But his job, performed correctly at the critical moment, had saved hundreds of American lives and changed the course of a battle. The symbolism of that radar ping echoed far beyond one engagement. It represented the industrialization of warfare, the triumph of American manufacturing and innovation over Japanese martial tradition. Radar sets were being produced by the thousands in factories across the United States, installed on warships, merchant vessels, even small patrol craft. Fire control computers, gyroscopes, proximity fuses, all the complex technologies that turned raw industrial capacity into battlefield advantage. The Japanese could not match this production. Their economy, stretched thin by years of war in China and across the Pacific, lacked the resources, the factories, the trained engineers. They could build excellent ships and aircraft, but in small numbers, and their technology was increasingly obsolete. American ships arriving in the Pacific in 1943 and 1944 were not just more numerous, they were generations ahead in electronics, radar, damage control systems, and crew training. The gap was widening, and battles like Empress Augusta Bay made it visible, undeniable, terrifying. For the Marines ashore at Bougainville, the naval victory meant survival. They dug their foxholes deeper, strung barbed wire, and waited for the Japanese counterattack that never came. Omori's strike force had been their death sentence, a fleet sent to obliterate their transports, and leave them stranded, outnumbered, doomed. Instead, the transports remained untouched, continuing to unload supplies, ammunition, reinforcements. By November 2, the beachhead was secure. By the end of the week, Seabees were bulldozing an airstrip through the jungle. Within a month, American bombers were flying from Bougainville to Rabaul, pounding the once mighty fortress into rubble. The Japanese would never recover the initiative in the Solomon Islands. The path northward was open. The Japanese High Command, receiving Omori's after-action report, understood the strategic implications immediately. Rabaul was now untenable as a forward base. Its isolation was complete. Resources poured into its defense would be wasted. The decision was made to evacuate essential personnel and aircraft, to abandon the 100,000 troops and workers left behind, writing them off as acceptable losses. Those men would spend the rest of the war cut off, starving, enduring relentless American air raids, slowly dying from disease and malnutrition. They had been sacrificed not in a climactic battle but in the slow arithmetic of industrial warfare, where radar pings and production statistics mattered more than courage or sacrifice. Aboard Montpelier, in the days following the battle, crew members gathered around the radar room during off-watch hours, staring at the SG set with something approaching reverence. Brennan, the young technician, would sometimes demonstrate how it worked, explaining the principles of radio waves, reflections, signal processing. Most sailors understood little of the physics, but they understood the result. That green glowing screen, that sweeping arm of light, had seen the enemy first, and seeing first meant winning. One sailor, a gunner's mate from Georgia named Thomas Riddle, carved a small wooden plaque in the ship's workshop. On it, he burned the words, "The 1st of November, 1943, we saw them first." The plaque was mounted above the radar console, a shrine to technology and the men who trusted it. But technology alone does not explain the Battle of Empress Augusta Bay. Merrill's tactical acumen was critical. Lesser commanders, even with radar, might have hesitated, doubted the contacts, waited for visual confirmation. Merrill acted instantly, maneuvering his force into the perfect killing position, while the enemy remained oblivious. His destroyer captains executed their orders flawlessly, pressing attacks with aggressive confidence. His cruiser commanders maintained formation discipline, delivering massed firepower with devastating effect. The victory was a synthesis of technology, training, leadership, and the kind of aggressive initiative that American doctrine increasingly emphasized. The Japanese had trained for battles of attrition, expecting long, grinding engagements where superior spirit would prevail. The Americans trained for decisive action, overwhelming firepower, and the ruthless exploitation of any advantage. At Empress Augusta Bay, those doctrines collided, and the American approach proved superior in every dimension. The sound of radar, if it had a sound beyond the soft whir of rotating antennas and the hum of electronics, became a recurring motif in the memories of those who fought that night. Years later, in interviews and memoirs, survivors from both sides would describe the battle in terms of perception and blindness. Japanese accounts spoke of fighting ghosts, of shells arriving from nowhere, of dying without ever seeing the enemy. American accounts spoke of clinical precision, of targets reduced to coordinates and bearing marks, of killing efficiently and dispassionately because the enemy was an abstraction on a screen. This was modern warfare, stripped of the personal, the heroic, the romantic. It was mathematics and physics, electrical pulses and calculated solutions, and it was terrifyingly effective. The transformation in American naval warfare was not limited to radar. The Battle of Empress Augusta Bay demonstrated the maturation of an entire system. Radar-directed gunfire, centralized combat information centers, improved damage control, better crew training, superior logistics. Japanese ships, even when undamaged, often struggled with mechanical failures, poor maintenance, inadequate spare parts. American ships, supported by a vast logistical network, could repair battle damage, replace equipment, and return to action quickly. The difference was not just in one technology, but in the entire industrial and organizational ecosystem that supported the fleet. This was the true American advantage, the one that no amount of courage or tactical brilliance could overcome. The United States was not just fighting a war, it was manufacturing victory. Rabaul, once the key to Japanese control of the South Pacific, withered under the siege. American bombers, flying from Bougainville and other newly captured bases, struck the harbor, the airfields, the supply depots with relentless regularity. Japanese aircraft losses mounted. Pilots who had survived years of combat were killed in the skies over Rabaul or died when their airfields were cratered beyond use. The surviving ships of Omori's strike force, patched up and sent back to Japan for proper repairs, would never return to the South Pacific. The Japanese combined fleet was running out of warships, running out of pilots, running out of time. And they knew it. The propaganda broadcasts from Tokyo still promised final victory, but the officers and men fighting the war understood the arithmetic. Every battle lost, every ship sunk, every pilot killed was irreplaceable. The Americans could absorb losses and come back stronger. The Japanese could not. The sailors of Task Force 39 returned to their routines, their victory already becoming just another entry in the war diary. There were more islands to invade, more convoys to escort, more battles to fight. The war was far from over. But something had changed in their understanding of the conflict. They had been told they were fighting for freedom, for democracy, for the defense of civilization against tyranny. Those were abstractions, difficult to hold on to in the midst of fear and exhaustion. But the radar screen, the precision of their fire, the overwhelming superiority they had demonstrated, those were concrete. They were winning not because they were braver or more willing to die, but because they were better equipped, better trained, better organized. American abundance, American industry, American innovation were not just support systems. They were weapons, as deadly as any torpedo or bomb, and they were winning the war. On the evening of November 2, as the sun set over Empress Augusta Bay and the last American transports withdrew, leaving behind a secure beachhead and 15,000 Marines, Rear Admiral Merrill stood on the bridge of Montpelier, watching the horizon turn orange and purple. He held in his hand a decoded message from Admiral Halsey. "Congratulations on a superbly executed action. You have avenged Savo Island." Merrill read it twice, then folded the message and placed it in his pocket. He thought about the Japanese sailors who had died, men he would never meet, men who had fought bravely for a cause they believed in. He thought about the American sailors under his command, men who had trusted his decisions, who had operated their machines with skill and discipline. He thought about the radar ping at 2:17, the moment everything had changed. And he wondered if the Japanese understood yet that this was a war they could not win, not because they lacked courage, but because they lacked the factories, the resources, the technological momentum that America possessed in bottomless abundance. The green glow of the radar screen continued its endless sweep, around and around, painting the ocean in electronic light. Darkness held no secrets from it. Distance offered no protection. The age of blind combat was ending. The age of electronic warfare had begun, and for the Japanese Navy, that transition was a death sentence written in radar pings and fire control solutions, in salvos that arrived with mathematical precision from enemies they could not see. The Battle of Empress Augusta Bay was not the largest naval engagement of World War II, not the most famous, not the one that would dominate the history books. But it was the battle that demonstrated, with brutal clarity, that technological superiority could negate every traditional advantage, every hard-won skill, every ounce of courage and sacrifice. It was the battle that showed seeing first meant killing first. And it was the battle that proved one radar ping, detected by a tired technician at 2:17 inches the morning, could change everything. Years later, historians would analyze the battle, drawing diagrams, calculating gunnery percentages, debating Merrill's decisions and Omori's mistakes. But the essential truth remained simple. The Americans saw the enemy first, positioned themselves perfectly, and executed with overwhelming force. The Japanese, blind and unaware, sailed into an ambush of their own making, victims not of bad luck or poor leadership, but of the relentless march of technology and the industrial might that produced it. The radar ping was not just a detection. It was a herald, announcing the arrival of a new kind of warfare where machines extended human senses beyond their natural limits, where darkness and distance no longer protected, where tradition and experience bowed before circuits and antennas. The symbolic power of radar as a representation of American technological supremacy was not lost on either side. For the United States, it became a source of pride, proof that innovation and industry could defeat fanaticism and aggression. For Japan, it became a bitter reminder of their industrial limitations, their inability to compete in the realm of advanced electronics and mass production. The war would continue for another 2 years, filled with battles larger and bloodier than Empress Augusta Bay. But the trajectory was set. American forces would advance, island by island, employing superior technology, superior logistics, and superior firepower. Japanese forces would fight with desperate courage, inflicting casualties, delaying the inevitable, but never again achieving the kind of stunning victories that had marked the early months of the war. The tide had turned, and battles like Empress Augusta Bay were the proof, written in burning ships and broken formations. The legacy of that November night in 1943 extends beyond the immediate tactical results. It influenced naval doctrine for generations, establishing principles of sensor warfare, integrated combat systems, and information dominance that remain central to modern naval operations. The lesson was clear. In any engagement, the side that sees first, understands the tactical situation most completely, and acts most decisively, will almost certainly win. Radar was the first step in that evolution. But it was only the first. Sonar, radio direction finding, electronic warfare, satellite reconnaissance, every advance in sensing and communication technology, built on the foundation laid in battles like Empress Augusta Bay. The modern naval battle, fought with missiles and computers, with data links and network-centric warfare, is the direct descendant of that dark night when Admiral Merrill trusted a glowing screen and a young technician's report. The survivors of Omori's strike force, scattered across the Pacific in various assignments after the battle, carried the memory of that defeat with them. They spoke of it quietly, in private conversations, sharing the bitter knowledge that they had been obsolete, outmatched not by better sailors but by better machines. Some became fatalistic, believing the war was already lost, that American production would simply overwhelm them regardless of how hard they fought. Others clung to hope, believing that one great victory, one decisive battle, could still turn the tide. But deep down, in moments of honesty, they knew they had sailed into the darkness confident and experienced, and they had been destroyed by an enemy they never saw. That was the future of war, and they were on the wrong side of it. In the end, the Battle of Empress Augusta Bay was about more than ships and radar. It was about the collision of two worldviews, two approaches to war, two visions of what modern conflict required. Japan had built its military on tradition, discipline, and the warrior spirit, believing that superior morale and training could compensate for material disadvantages. America had built its military on industry, innovation, and technological superiority, believing that superior equipment and organization would ultimately prevail. At Empress Augusta Bay, those philosophies met in the darkness, and the verdict was decisive. The radar ping at 2:17 was not just an electronic signal, it was the sound of the future, announcing itself, erasing the past, transforming warfare into something cold, precise, and relentlessly effective. And so the green glow swept endlessly around, searching, detecting, revealing. It illuminated not just ships and positions, but the nature of power itself, demonstrating that control of information, mastery of technology, and the ability to see clearly in the fog of war were the keys to victory. The Japanese had been brave, skilled, determined, but they had been blind. And in the new age of warfare, blindness was fatal. The radar ping changed everything because it represented everything. American industrial might, technological innovation, tactical flexibility, and the cold, inexorable logic of modern war. It was a single electronic pulse, lasting a fraction of a second, reflecting off steel hulls in the darkness, and it erased a strike force, changed a campaign, and wrote a chapter in the history of how wars are won and lost.